Hello, you're listening to Deeply Curious. My name is Cody Jensen, and joining me in our New York City studio apartment is my wife, Sarah.
Hello.
And a very special guest joining us all the way from Enid, Oklahoma, sitting in a radio booth at KOFM, Oklahoma's country radio, is my father, Greg Jensen.
How we doing?
My dad is very nervous.
Yes.
This is his first podcast.
Yes.
We also have him set up with a professional microphone and put a video camera in his face. It's not his regular everyday, thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not my regular lifetime thing ever.
Yeah. But I wanted to have my dad on the show because there's just some things that I would like to just have a discussion about, because that's what this podcast is about, just having discussions. It's called Deeply Curious because we're curious people, and that is actually what we're going to be talking about, is just what does it actually mean to be curious?
Curiosity.
Yes. But before we jump into today's episode, first I want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to our sponsor. Dad, do you want to give him who our sponsor is?
B&H. I don't
That's
know
right.
the rest of it.
B&H Photo Video is a massive superstore in New York City where you can get all of your photo, video, and pro audio gear.
Yes.
Meet all of your needs. The reason that we love them is not only because they have anything and everything that we could possibly want, but because they are committed to partnering with creatives and helping us create better art for you guys. So the reason that we sound so great is because B&H hooked us up with all of our podcasting gear. And if you want to see any of the podcasting gear that we are using, you can click any of the links in the show notes or in the description of the video. And that will take you to, those are affiliate links. And so that helps us out, lets B&H know how you found them, which ultimately helps us out. So thank you guys for using those links, and also a huge thank you to B&H Photo Video. Check them out online and in their their New York City superstore. Yeah. Oklahoma's on the brain because that is where my dad is right now. Right. Enid, America.
Home.
The reason my dad is sitting in a professional radio booth is because they live in a small town called Enid, and we were like, how do we get a professional recording of you?
How does this not sound like FaceTime?
Right. I don't want to do just a phone call. I want this to be professional. It's like, who do we know? And he's like, well, I guess I could call my friends down at the radio station and I could sit in this radio booth and to record the podcast. I'm like, well, that wouldn't happen if you lived in a big city. So I guess there's advantage one of living in Enid.
Yes, it was very easy. They're very kind to do this.
Yeah, so also I guess big thank you to KOFM, Oklahoma's country radio. So jumping into today's conversation, I wanted to talk about what does it mean to be curious, because we named this podcast Deeply Curious, but we've never had a conversation of what it actually means to be curious. Yeah. And so I guess that's the question that I'm going to throw out there is just, what does it mean to you to be a curious person?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I think at the most basic, to me, being curious just means being interested. So it could be, random facts or something like really important, or somebody's story, or what they enjoy doing, whatever hobby they have. Like, I want to know the ins and outs of it, I think just at the most basic, being curious means being interested.
Yeah, I was thinking that curiosity almost, it kind of goes hand in hand with humbleness, because it comes with the notion that, or maybe even the wisdom of knowing that you don't know everything.
Right.
And so it makes you, curious to actually know things.
Well, there are obviously, 8 billion people in the world. So there are 8 billion different life points of views. And I feel like you should want to learn them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that makes you a more wise, well-rounded individual.
Yeah, I think it just means, to me, it's always learning new stuff. in your job or just in life in general, just, history, being curious about, back in school, you didn't care about that stuff. But as you get older, it seems to, at least for me, I'm very curious about, history and how we got to where we're at. And, and then as far as the job goes, just always learning new stuff and how to better yourself, being curious about getting to the next level.
Do you think, what's the value of being a curious person?
Well, I think I mentioned it a minute ago, but to me, I think the value is just being well-rounded. And I think, what's that saying? Like, you can only be as interesting as you are interested.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is kind of, to me, the value of being curious is like you become endlessly fascinating to people.
Right.
And you become like a good person, like somebody with a good work ethic, like Greg was just talking about, like just being curious about getting better at your job. Like you become a better individual.
The more you know, the better conversations you have with people. It just makes your life much more interesting, which, in turn, when you're with a group of people or, doing what you do, it just makes the conversations, funner and more exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have always been a curious person? Were you a curious kid?
That was a long time ago.
Back in 1965.
To a point, I think I was. In school, I don't feel like I was. I mean, I just wanted to get through school, and my grades showed that. But I think I probably was, but not near as curious as I am now. I think I've became more curious as I got older.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Greg mentioned being more curious in history, because you and I were just talking about that the other day,
mm-hmm.
about how, like, if we learned history, like you're reading this book called Boomtown and this other
right.
book called Killers of the Flower Moon, like if we learned history the way that those books were written, how much more interested we would be in history. And I think that's true. I think like whenever you're growing up, you don't really understand the value of knowing things
mm-hmm.
until you get older and realize that. I think because sort of when we're younger, we think we know everything. And then you grow up and you realize you know nothing.
Yeah.
And that's when curiosity becomes valuable.
I also think that it shows the value of great teachers.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Because history is one of those things that's only as interesting as basically the person that is telling you, or the content, or like the way it's written. And so Sarah's mentioned, I just read a book called Boomtown, and it's all about how Oklahoma City started. And it is fascinating. I blew through the book.
Yeah, you did.
But I spent, I don't know how many years in Oklahoma, like in school. You have to take Oklahoma history, and they teach you all of this crap that I didn't care to learn because it was so boring. But then I'm an adult now, 30 years old, 29 years old, and I'm like reading this book for fun that is just the history of Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
But whenever I was done with it, I was like, if history books were written this way, then way more people would care about history.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so the reason I wanted to talk about, like, were you a curious person and that type of stuff is more so, I guess, getting to the root of, can curiosity be fostered? Can you choose to become a curious person?
100%.
I'd say yes.
I mean, I think like all you have to do is decide to be interested. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't take much to be curious. You just have to be aware and like pay attention and ask questions. That's not hard, and you can totally foster that.
Yeah. Dad, how do you feel? Do you feel like you ever made the decision? Not necessarily you said, I'm going to be a curious person now, but do you think there was a shift in your life going from being a kid who you didn't care into an adult who does?
There's definitely a shift. I don't know how quick it was. I don't know that it was overnight, but I do remember just thinking about history. All of a sudden, it's like I might have been watching something on history or something. I don't know what made me click, but I do remember specifically that clicking in my head that, man, I'd like, I wish I would have paid more attention in school and learned this stuff.
So the reason I thought that having my dad in this conversation about curiosity is because you raised me to be a curious person.
Yes.
And so, my first question, I guess, would be, was that an intentional thing that you did, or was that just an extension of who you already were?
I think it may have been an extension but at the same time, I always wanted you guys to think for yourselves. I never, I let you guys make your own decisions for the most part. There's lots of things that we can get into, parenting and raising kids, but as far as just staying on that subject,
we can get into anything. Nobody's
I know.
censoring us.
I'm just saying, when you wanted to do something, we always tried to provide you with the tools to do that, and so you could be curious. Buying you cameras and ventriloquist dolls or video cameras, whatever it was that you was really into, we always purchase those items so that you could, be curious about it and figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I think that played such a massive role into who I became.
Yes.
Because whenever I was a kid, like my dad was just saying, that if I got interested into something and I was genuinely interested in it, they would use their resources and help me, foster that curiosity.
Right.
I went through a lot of different phases as a kid, but I played every single sport whenever I was a kid. Part of that was because of my interest, and part of it was because of your interest, and me figuring out who I was, and separate from my parents. So as a small child, obviously we don't know who we are. We just are. We are our parents' kids. And so, my dad's definitely a sports guy. And so, put us into the sports we were interested in. But then those moments where I said, I'm not interested in this anymore. I didn't play it, another day. You wasn't like you
Right.
were forcing me to
Right.
no, we signed up, but I always finished the season.
Right.
But, if it was like the next season, I was like, I don't want to go back. I remember.
You always finished the season and got your participation trophy.
Right. Exactly.
Needed that participation.
I remember playing baseball and doing every step, starting at, I think at T-ball, going up to, coach pitch,
Yeah.
going through all the seasons. And then the next season was kid pitch, and I wanted to quit. And I have a vivid memory of wanting to quit because I was just scared of kid pitch. And, you told me, or you sat me down or whatever, and you're like, why do you want to quit? And I was like, just because I don't want to play anymore. And you're like, well, is it because you're scared? And I was like, no, definitely not. I just don't want to play anymore. And you're like, okay. So it was like we had those conversations. It wasn't just giving into every whimsy.
Right.
It was actually like a conversation of why and all that type of stuff. But I have memories, of not just hobbies. There's the hobbies of, I got into ventriloquism, and you fostered that. We started with getting small puppets, and then getting more and more expensive puppets. And as I continued to be interested in that, eventually getting an actual professional dummy.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also other things, like whenever you bought a computer back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I was, this kid, you let me play with it.
Right.
And you let me, do what I wanted. And even though I could break it and I could, hurt the machine that you spent thousands of dollars on or how much ever it cost, you allowed me to explore and you allowed me to be curious.
Yes.
Which fostered just who I innately was, because it wasn't you saying like, hey, here, I bought you this camera, or hey, here, I bought you this ventriloquism doll. It was like, in no way did you, ever think, I think I'm going to get Cody into puppetry.
Right.
I found that on my own, and you didn't stop me,
Right.
and helped me and encouraged me. But more so, sorry, I'm going to keep talking about the hobbies, but the thing that I think was so valuable besides allowing me to have the hobbies is allowing me the access to your adult things, like computers. And then I remember you bought a $1,000 3.5-inch floppy disk camera.
Yep.
It was a digital camera that took 3.5-inch floppy disk, and I remember that it cost $1,000 because it was a big deal that you were able to spend $1,000 on a camera,
Right?
And it immediately you let me play with it, and I was only, I guess I would have been in the 6th, 7th grade around that time whenever you got that camera, and you could stick this floppy disk in the camera, and you could take
it's insane to me that it was a floppy disk.
Yeah. You could take, I think, 12 or 15 pictures or something on each floppy disk.
Man, how times have changed.
It was a big deal though back then. That camera was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I was able to use this thing and go out and just take photos and foster my curiosity into photography, and my interest, and figuring out these different low angles, and doing all this weird stuff that my dad and my mom, neither one of you guys are artists or professional creatives or anything like that. So it wasn't that you guys were sitting there saying like, hey, why don't you foster your what you're feeling, like,
go work on your art.
You're sad, why don't you go write a song about it? It was never like fostering that creativity in that way. It was just allowing me to be curious, which I think was so valuable, and I think it's such a huge lesson in, parenting, I would say.
Yeah, I think mostly just allowing your kids to explore, but also when you grow up and you're responsible for yourself, exploring is just so important. Like, you don't even know what you're going to find, and that is going to change your life. Yeah, that's what curiosity is about.
Another story is you. Many people who listen know that you bought a water park, or you owned a water park whenever I was a kid. So I was in 3rd grade whenever the water park was purchased. And so I spent every summer from that point on until I moved out at this water park, learning and being curious and doing all these things. But the thing that this memory that I have is you had a welder, there for repairs and all that type of stuff. And whether this is good parenting or not, I don't know, but you allowed me to play with the welder. Like, I was curious, how does the welder work? And so I found this broken wagon, and you told me I had to wear the mask. And so I put the mask on and I fixed the wagon. It was like the worst welding job, in the history of welding. And it, broke after, 2 days. But then I was like, okay, it broke, so I can go back and I can weld it again. And so, my curiosity didn't foster into a welding, career, but I was curious enough to now know, generally speaking, how a welder works, TIG and MIG welding. It's not like I ever went to school or learned any of that type of stuff. It's just because you were doing things in front of me and I was interested and you allowed me to watch.
Right. Part of it may have been selfish on my part, because the better you got at video and stuff, the more I could use you for advertising for the water park. But you did make some pretty good commercials and a lot of good pictures we took for advertising. So.
That's true. You know, fostering me to be a part of the family business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because
then you had to get up and move away. So
yeah. Another thing with being curious is being a curious person means that you do not fall into group thinking.
Yeah.
That you are curious about what other people's, you know, opinions are. You're curious about how other people live. You are curious about just life outside your own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that curiosity is it's almost needed.
Yeah.
In most of our lives, especially in our political climate. And I don't want to get into like a political discussion, because we could talk about it forever, but just I think that if in this world, if we were all much more deeply curious people, we wouldn't be in such a divisive culture.
Yeah, you know, what I think, I was kind of mentioning this at the beginning when we were talking about what even is curiosity, about how there are 8 billion points of view and like you should go out there and learn them. I think curiosity, this is literally just a thought, it just popped in my head, so I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think curiosity fosters empathy. I think it teaches empathy. Even if you're not curious about another person, you're curious, like it's just such a different mindset that like it puts you into being a more empathetic individual, I think, or at least in my experience. Like I'm curious about all kinds of things, but like most of the time that'll involve a conversation with another person, right? I'm like curious about your hobby and like why you like archiving or whatever it is, you know, that fosters a really great conversation. Even if archiving doesn't seem that interesting, like the person is passionate about it. You know what I mean? So like you learn to love something because somebody else loves it.
Right.
And I think that teaches empathy.
Yeah. And something talking about, you know, listening to other people. I mean, I have employees that, you know, help fix up houses and remodel houses and stuff. And, you know, I have the way that I want things done, but at the same time, I want to hear their opinion on that. And if they have a better idea, then I definitely want to hear it. I mean, I want to hear their opinions, good or bad, you know, and then, you know, I'll make a decision off of that. But, you know, I am always curious to, you know, looking at how they feel about it and making the job easier and quicker and cheaper, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you shouldn't be so, I don't think arrogant is the right word, but arrogant that you think somebody else wouldn't have a good idea. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you should always be curious about what other people's input is, because it could save you time, it could save you money, it could save you lots of things, you know? So like not being so stuck in your mindset pays off. It benefits you.
Right.
You know?
So before we move on in the conversation, I guess, do we have any advice for people who don't feel like they're a curious person, of how to go from basically a fixed mindset to a curious mindset?
My advice is just kind of like the thing we always say is read the plaque. And obviously we're talking specifically like at a museum about a painting, and like you read the plaque of like how the painting came about, or you read, you know, whatever. I think it's just that kind of general idea across the board, you know, just read the plaque. Like you see something that sparks your interest in a bookstore, like some cover that sparks your interest, pick it up and read what it's about. Like see why it sparked your interest. Another thing that I read in a magazine one time is they said that like go to a bookstore, find the first book that catches your eye and buy it and read it and see why. You know what I mean? And I think it's that. It's just like paying attention and reading the plaque would be my advice.
I think another thing is to start asking questions that just, again, it kind of goes back to the humbleness thing, that if you don't know something, don't feel like it is stupid to ask a question.
Right.
It is not. Like, it's stupid to not ask the question.
Yeah.
That if there is something that you're like, I wonder how that works, ask. Or I don't know how that works, ask, or why is it that way? Like, I think that part of it is a twofold. One, don't be so arrogant that you think that you need to know everything, and so you don't want to look stupid, to ask. And then also, I think on the other side, that if you do have really low self-esteem and you think, well, I mean, I'm just dumb, like I don't really, I just don't know things, I can't learn things, whatever. Those are all lies that you are telling yourself, and in reality, you have the ability to learn the things that you want to learn. You have the ability to become a curious person, and even if you do forget it in the next day, at least you were feeding your mind.
Yeah, and nobody looks down on somebody asking questions.
Right.
I know that's like a common fear, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna look like the idiot who doesn't know, right? But nobody thinks that. Literally nobody. They're like, oh, they want to improve themselves, let me help them, and then they tell you. Yeah,
something that I'm always real curious about is why people are the way they are. I mean, why they are depressed or scared or just loud. I mean, obnoxious. I mean, if you look past that and get into their history, their childhood, whatever, it's very fascinating to see, and it's easy to see once you see it.
Yeah.
But that's why when somebody's saying, well, that person's a jerk, well, I mean, because they said something, and I'm like, well, is that really what they meant? I always try to look back and see, well, I mean, I don't think that's really what they probably were meaning. I don't think they was meaning to be mean to you. It's just, their history has caused them to react to certain things in certain ways.
Yeah.
I think what Sarah was saying about, nobody is going to think you're stupid for asking a question. I think that that's actually not true.
I know it's not true, but
there are plenty of people who are going to think that you're stupid for asking a question, and they're going to be like, you didn't know that whatever, and you're like, no, but that.
But what I'm saying is that general idea doesn't stand. There are going to be people who think that you're dumb for asking a question, yes, but generally speaking, the whole population of the earth is not looking at you like you're an idiot.
But I think more so that if people are looking down on you and they are thinking that you are stupid for asking the question, those are actually the stupid people.
Yeah.
I mean, they are the idiots who are thinking that you should know everything that they know. It's the curse of knowledge.
Yeah.
An idiot may be too strong of a word, but
maybe not.
It's what I got.
You never know.
I do want to pivot the conversation, which will be a pun here in a second whenever you realize what the topic is. But first, we're going to take a short break. Deeply Curious is also brought to you by Deeply Curious merch, which you can get at shop.deeplycurious.fm. We have a few different t-shirt and hoodie options, and also a coffee mug so you can sip your Deeply Curious coffee while you're listening to your Deeply Curious podcast.
There's Deeply Curious coffee.
Oh, if it's in a Deeply Curious mug, then it's Deeply Curious coffee.
Gotcha.
Everybody knows whatever cup it's in, that's what it is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Can we promote tea, though, instead of coffee?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
Or hot
whenever you're
chocolate.
having...
Yeah.
So if you're having some English breakfast tea or some hot chocolate with Baileys in
Yes.
your
There
Deeply
you go.
Curious mug, you can...
Tell us thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to talk to my dad about is something that he has set an example for me basically my whole life, and that is never being afraid to pivot, and
Yeah.
in life and in career. So, I guess I'll let you jump in here instead of me telling your life story. I'll just let you do it.
So you want to hear my life story, or?
I mean, just I think just your whole every 10 years, type situation.
Okay. Well, coming out of school, I had no clue what I was going to do. I really wasn't college material. 'Cause, I mean, I think they passed me just to get me through. I don't think my grades had anything to do with me graduating, but anyway, I did take. My junior year, I took auto mechanics, thinking that might be something I could do. I quickly learned that that wasn't my thing. I probably the best thing I learned out of there was how to play liar's poker. Because that's pretty much all we did was played games instead of learning. But then the next year, I took carpentry because that was what my dad had done, and so I thought, well, maybe that's what I will be doing for the rest of my life. And so after school, I took a job with a builder, lasted for about 4 months. I really don't know if I left the job or if the job left me, but I worked a few jobs, but then I got a job as a grain inspector, and I did that for 10 years, and I worked my way all the way up to the quality control person. The only person ahead of me was the owner. So it kind of got to a point where, there was nothing to, nowhere to move up. Then had an opportunity to go to work for a friend of mine. Did that for 2 years. But, the thing is, it's scary sometimes. But, if you get to a point in your life where, you're just not moving, you got to take that risk and go for it. And that job, it was fun for about 6 months out of the 2 years. But anyways, at that point, I had the opportunity to purchase the water park, and I was 32 years old at that point. I'd worked 10 years as a grain inspector, 2 years at the RV parts and service, and then moved into the water park, and we risked everything, because the water park at that point was losing money, and we were taking on this challenge that we had no knowledge about whatsoever. We bought the park in March, is opening in May, and end of May, so we had like 3 months to learn everything we needed to do, how to get the park ready, and we was able to do it, and probably didn't make it much money, if anything, that first year. Probably lived off credit cards, but the second year we started making money, and then we had several really good years. But first of all, the water park is a 6 month out of the year deal, so the other 6 months I'm trying to figure out what to do. So we started several other little businesses. At one point we started a skateboard shop. Well, we rented the local putt-putt and operated that, and we started a skateboard shop, Cody.
Which I think that right there is another curiosity thing, because I got really into skateboarding.
Yes.
And you would have never started a skateboard shop on your own.
No.
But you had the space, and I was very into skateboarding. I was like, we should open a skateboard shop, and you're like, okay. Yeah. And then, but you're going to work it.
It was very cool too. It was a very nice shop, but
right. But also you opened it, but then you made me work it.
Yes.
And so, it not only was it like playing into curiosity, but also building, skills and work ethic in me. Cause you're like, well, let's start it. But also you have to, be here after school and work until
you want to open it. You're going to open it
whenever. So yeah.
Yeah, but that was a lot of fun. Your friends loved it, cause they got to hang out. But then, we actually had the water park for 20 years. But 10 years into it, my curiosity got the best of me, and and was having a conversation with a friend, and I said something about real estate, and that I thought about getting my real estate license, and my wife overheard me, and next thing I know, I'm signed up for the real estate course. And so anyways, a couple of years later, I got her to get hers. And so for the next 10 years, I mean, we're operating the water park, but at the same time, it's getting harder and harder to operate because the real estate's just kind of taken over our lives. And then, several years into the real estate, we're doing really well. We start investing in real estate, and then I started a rental management division. And then 10 years into it, I wound up buying the company, and kind of pivoted the company from real estate to, we still do the real estate buying or selling and buying for people, but my part of it has switched over to rental management and investing. I buy several houses a year and rent them out, and I've got a crew and everything, and that's kind of the direction that I'm heading now. So I mean, it seems like about every 10 years I'm pivoting to something new, and it's just gotten better and better every time. But you don't just quit one and get into the other one. Every time I've pivoted, I pretty much knew where I was going and had a plan, for the next step, so I was always prepared and felt pretty comfortable because I was kind of doing both of them at the same time, which is a lot of work. But
so the reason I appreciate my dad's story in this is because I was able to grow up during the time of his life of whenever I was born, of we're working Domino's or Pizza Hut.
I was working at the grain inspection as a grain inspector, but my philosophy always was, which is kind of the opposite of yours, but if I wanted something new, if I wanted cable, or if I wanted a new car, I didn't cut one thing out to be able to get that. I went and figured out how to make the money to get that item. So.
Maximalism versus minimalism.
Yes.
So you were working, delivering pizzas to pay for new cable.
I worked at the racetrack and the concessions on Saturday or weekends, and just Olin Mills delivering packets and just whatever. I put on some roofs for people. It's just whatever I could find to do extra.
And those were the things that I saw.
Yeah,
because. Obviously, I saw the grain inspection, but that was also something that you were doing the 9 to 5. It was. I didn't really notice that. There was a few times that I remember like going up there with mom or whatever to visit you or something, but I remember going to the racetrack for the concession stand and the other gigs. And so basically, as a kid, I got to watch my dad do all of these different things, and then start working at this RV place, and then purchase a water park. And then not only purchase a water park, but take the water park that had been closed and reopen it, revamping it, cleaning it, and fixing it, and doing all of the things that it takes to actually open a water park. And then, work in that business for 10 years, and while at the same time raising me, putting me to work at the water park and teaching me valuable skills there. But then this is the part where I think is such a valuable story, is that you had a career job. I mean, not the grain inspection was a career job, pivot, and you buy into a better career job where now you are now the owner instead of the just below the owner. And you are building this business that you only have to work 6 months of the year, and you can provide modestly for your family for the whole year by working those 6 months, but then in that meantime, you weren't afraid to try other things. And I watched as, we tried out the putt-putt business, the skate shop business, a fiberglass business working in the oil field. And I got to see not only the successes, but the failures of those.
Yes. Yeah, we didn't talk about the failure of the fiberglass business. That was not
right. But I got to see those, and I got to see you succeeding in some and failing in others. But that I never saw you stop, nor did I ever see you, I guess, get down on yourself for that. Of just like, oh, woe is me, I failed, I can't do this, type thing. It was like, oh, well, that failed. That's on me. I guess I'm gonna have to take. I saw you take responsibility for other people's actions, even, which taught me things. But the grand scheme of this story, though, is watching you pivot and watching you do something that I think most, if not all, close to all, millennials are so afraid of doing.
Yeah. I think, well, speaking for myself as a millennial, I think we're so afraid of missing it that we actually don't do anything, instead of just realizing that we can try anything and like time is on our side. You know what I mean? I think we feel like if we're not, rich and famous and successful by 25, then we failed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true by any means. And just by trying things, that's where you find your life's work. But yeah, millennials are terrified of that.
Right. And not only I feel like are so many people afraid to start something. So, it wasn't an easy thing to buy the water park. It was like all the chips on the table type situation.
Yeah, we risk everything for that.
And so it wasn't easy to say yes to the beginning. But even still, risking everything, making it work, I feel like in my generation, I just see so many people, they wouldn't put all the chips on the table because what if I hate it? What if this doesn't work out? What if I am successful and this thing actually becomes something and now I'm stuck in this and I don't actually want to do it?
Yeah.
And I think that the lie, I don't know where we got the lie from, but there is this lie that if you start something and you get into something and you start a career or you start a job or you create a business, that now you are stuck in that business for life, forever.
Yeah, you can't get out.
And you can never get out.
I think the reason we're so hesitant to do anything is because of that. Like, I think we're so hesitant because we feel like the choice has to be absolutely perfect or absolutely right, or our life is ruined. We're not, because you can't get out is the idea, right? I don't know where it came from either, but it's definitely something that we're scared about. Like we're terrified of picking the wrong thing. And that's, I think, the brilliance of Greg's story is that like every 10 years he has pivoted, and it has not stopped his career. It hasn't stopped him building his life.
It's actually multiplied his career. It's
multiplied, yeah. Like not being afraid to pivot has benefited you and your family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the lesson.
Yeah. And I think that knowing that you're not stuck in something is so valuable. One, to actually
freeing.
Yes, and freeing to actually make the decision to do something, because you're trying something isn't signing a lifelong contract.
Right. It's so freeing to be like, I'm going to try this thing, and if it doesn't work, cool. I'm going to try another thing. Again, it goes back to being curious, I think. It's keeping that like open mindset that like you're not stuck. And as much as it doesn't feel like it, I think time really is on your side.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be successful successful, the classic definition at 25, you know, that most people aren't. Most people hit their success way later in life.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it goes back into like keeping that mindset.
Yeah.
You know, like I say, when I got out of high school, I didn't know what I was wanting to do. And I think you can't let that hold you back. You know, I mean, I didn't feel like I was smart enough to do much of anything. You know, if you don't try, you're never going to get anywhere. If you don't, you know, my thing is, you know, if there's an opportunity and the door opens for that opportunity, if you don't stick your foot in that door and hold it open, the door's shut, and you're never going to get anywhere. So don't ever give up on your dreams. If you've got a dream, just, you know, work your butt off till you get there. So
I think like what we were saying with our generation is it's being like paralysis by analysis, being paralyzed by so many options that, you know, you get out of high school and all throughout high school, and your parents and all of your teachers have been telling you, you can be anything. You can do anything that you want to do.
right.
And so then you graduate and you're like, okay, I can do anything that I want to do. And
what do I want?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And so it just not being afraid to actually pick something, to actually start something. And if you get into it and you don't like it and it doesn't work out, you can always do something else.
Yeah. And I think mostly, like kind of to what your dad was saying, it just takes grit. Like regardless of what you think your skills are or your IQ or, you know, what your insecurities, whatever, all it really takes is grit.
Yep.
And like not stopping and just picking something.
Right.
Fake it
seeing
till you
how
make
far
it.
you can. Yeah. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Seeing how
Yep.
far you can go.
So the things that my dad has modeled for me in my life and other factors led me to the point where in the same thing, I was in a career job for 10 years until I was 28 years old. And we decided to kind of do the same, you know, we didn't buy a business, but we packed up, sold everything, and started a new life in New York City, where we basically risked it all to follow our dreams and to do something. And I went from a, you know, creative director, and it's not like I completely like a 100% pivot, you know, of, you know, leaving creativity or even like multimedia or whatever you want to say it is. But, you know, I went from being a creative director where video was a part of my job.
Very small part. Yeah.
But, you know, it was only, a small part of my job, to the point now where I was like, wait, video is one of those things that I do in my regular job that is one of the things that energizes me the most. It's the thing that I started with whenever I was in 7th grade. You know, video is what really got me into creativity, more than photography, more than graphic design, you know, more than creative directing or interior design or any of the other things that I do love. But video is really the thing that, you know, is my passion, and it drives me and it energizes me. And so went from 10 years of being a creative director and decided, well, I'm going to pivot and, you know, sell everything, move to New York City. And now for the last year and a half, I've been making at least a video a week, at most 3 videos a week, for a year and a half, to the point where now where it's like getting close to 175, something like that, you know, videos that I have created in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
And
8.5 more years.
yeah, exactly.
I want to say something, or I want to point something out that I think is actually really good advice for people who are maybe dissatisfied and like looking for something new, but have no idea where to even begin. Because you said video is where you started and you went back to that because that's your passion. Greg, even though like you've pivoted, you know, a lot of times, but some of the stuff that you did in the very beginning was like carpentry, putting up roofs on for people, which is like all involved in real estate and flipping houses and the things you do now. I think we forget that what we did as a kid just for fun is actually really important to who we are as adults. Yeah. And so like if you're having a hard time, I think finding your passion or finding that thing, you know, that you want to pivot to, that you want to change, go back to when you were a kid. Like, what did you love? You know, there's going to be something there that turns into something else whenever you grow up, whenever you're an adult. That's what you should be chasing.
Yeah, that carpentry skill, I mean, that I learned back then has been, you know, priceless, you know, nowadays, because, you know, when it comes to knowing what we can do and can't do, I know firsthand how to do it. Of course, I'm not doing it, but you know, I can tell somebody how to do it. And, you know, it's just been very valuable to me.
And that is curiosity.
Right.
That's what curiosity brings you. It brings you those skills and that knowledge that you won't even realize you need for years down the road.
Yeah. And I think curiosity breeds creativity as well. Yeah. Because like, you know, with my dad, you know, he has all of these, like, you know, carpentry, you know how, you know, to spray fiberglass, you know how to fix a pump, and you know how to, you know, I could go on and on and on. I could spend probably this entire episode saying all of the different, wildly different skills that you have gained over your life. And I think that where creativity comes in that is that knowing those different things allows you to make connections that somebody else would not be able to make.
Yeah. That's creativity.
Right.
Creativity isn't, you know, it is painting and music and art and whatever, but it's problem solving. It's making connections. That's creativity.
Yeah.
Well, and I've got to give my dad props too, because he's, I learned kind of the same thing from him. I mean, he pivoted, you know, through jobs. You know, he had a termite and pest control business. He had a carpet cleaning business, a carpentry business. He was a caretaker at the Assembly of God campgrounds, you know, where he kind of did everything there. And so I watched that growing up, and I don't think I really thought about it until probably right now. But you know, that was the model that he set for me, and then that's kind of where I'm at.
I think. What do you think? I think that the negative side of pivot is commitment issues.
Yeah, I think on a personal note, that would be me. Like I get bored easy, and so me changing up things is not because necessarily I'm building, but just because I'm bored. You know what I mean? Yeah, I definitely think that can be a negative trait if you're not changing things up for the right reasons. But that comes down to self-awareness, I think. And like we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, is being self-aware and getting down to the truth of why you're doing what you're doing, and being honest about that.
So I wanted to have the conversation because I want to encourage people that pivoting is not a negative thing.
It's a positive.
You know, or at least it can be a positive thing, if not always.
I mean, I think 99.9% of the time it's positive.
And being stuck in something, I'm a very committed person.
Yes.
If I decide I'm going to do something, I commit to it.
Yeah.
And it is actually difficult for me to get me to pivot. Because I'm such a...
You're very loyal.
Yeah, and committed not only committed to others, but committed to myself too. It's like I decided that I'm going to do this, and so I'm doing it. And sometimes that could lead me to running myself into the ground, and you know, whether physically, emotionally,
Right.
you know, financially, you know, whatever it is, it's like, because I'm so committed to that, what I said I'm going to do.
Yes.
Versus, you know, which I think there is positive traits, you know, to that, because I think that gets into, you know, pivoting too early is having commitment issues,
Right.
and never pivoting is basically insanity,
Yeah.
or you know, it's
Well, it's like
being
not growing,
stuck. It's
right?
not growing.
Yeah.
You know, it's doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and expecting things to change. And so there is a balance
Yes.
of pivoting too often too early,
Yeah.
and pivoting at the right time.
I think that's maybe why you and I make a better team, because I like to pivot maybe every 6 months, and you're like, wait, let's just give it some time. Yeah.
Before we get too far along, we got to go back to the racetrack. When I was working the racetrack, Cody would go with me, and his first hustle at 5 years old, maybe 6, he started probably when he was 4 or 5 out there. But he'd just go with me, and the customers he would be serving hamburgers or whatever, and customers would always ask him if I was paying him good, and I'd always tell them that he's just working for tips. So about halfway through the season, I look over there and he's got a paper bag that he's holding up on the counter, and it says, "I am working for tips." And immediately he started making $50 a night off of tips. He was making more than I was.
I think that's very indicative of, well, really both of you, because I mean, Greg is an entrepreneur, and you learned that from your dad. But I think that is very indicative of like who you are, is just like, well, I see this opportunity, I'm going to do it.
And right. And learning to be an entrepreneur and learning business. You know, I was 6 years old, and you were taking me out there, not because you had to babysit me, you know, because you actually were letting me do things.
Yeah, like
And-
you were running cash register
Yeah,
at one
yeah.
point, right?
You were
Yeah.
letting me,
Giving change back and everything all on his own. at
you know,
6
it's like
years old.
it was all simple math. It's like the hot dog was $1.50, and I needed to give 50 cents back, you know, when they gave me $2. But it was still learning that type of stuff. You know,
Yeah,
at
but-
6 years old, running a register, people giving me a $5 bill, and you know, and you know, maybe you were in the back, you know, making it when you were like counting it out of like with me of, you know, what I need to be giving back or whatever. But I was learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, you learn pretty quick, and you was doing it all on your own, you know, within just a few weeks. So
Yeah, I think it's just a really good example of, you know, creating the space, I think, for people to be curious, but also just, you know, you like diving into that, you know what I mean? As a 6-year-old, just not even like, I mean, you were working, really. You were
Right.
working, but like you were fine with that because you were curious, you were learning, and you were building entrepreneurial skills and like making people tip you and whatever. But like I think it's a good lesson for people to pay attention to, of how to learn how to be curious, you know?
Right. So I've been reading the 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss, and one of the things that
my
that I
Christmas
just
present
read
from Cody.
yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he said that I really liked, that I was just reminded of because of, Sarah, what you were talking about of boredom and you being bored,
Yeah.
is he was talking about happiness. And he was saying that what he thinks is that a synonym for happiness is excitement. And if you were to look at the opposite of happiness, it's not sadness, it's not anger, it is boredom. That the opposite of happiness is boredom. And I really liked that,
Yeah.
and also very much made me think of you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yes. First of all, I love that quote. I read it, I don't know, 3 years ago or something, and I come back to it all the time, because I think we're all searching for happiness. Like that's a pretty common understanding, right? We're out here like trying to figure out what makes us happy. And I think just understanding that it's not what makes you happy, but what makes you excited that's important is important. Like that's what you should be paying attention to. Also, I love the quote because I get so restless and so bored so fast. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I do think it has its pros and cons, right? We can be honest about that. I do think that there's some good things about my restlessness that I like. Like, it makes me curious. It makes me discover new things. It makes me find new hobbies, whatever it is. It also is not great because I can't stick to anything, I have a really hard time, like we were just talking about, like being fully committed because I just get bored, even if I love what it is. Like, I mean, if we're being completely honest, making 3 videos a week, every single week for a year and a half, I'm bored now. Like I have to sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I have to convince myself that I want to film a video, I get bored really easy, and I don't know that that's a good thing, but I think understanding that it's excitement that you should be searching for rather than happiness, because happiness is so elusive.
Right.
But that you should pay attention to excitement is really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you hit there at the end is exactly what I was wanting to add, is that chasing happiness is so hard, because what is happiness?
Yeah.
It's so hard to define happiness, and it's like, what does it even mean to be happy?
Right.
But if you change your goal and you change your mindset, that you're not chasing happiness.
Right.
You're chasing excitement.
And excitement is curiosity.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you excited is what makes you curious.
And whatever you're curious about is what makes you excited.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, what a really good ending that is.
Yeah, I personally don't get bored very easy. I can get excited about anything. So, I'm typically a pretty happy person. And
do you get bored with doing the same thing too much?
Yes, I definitely get bored with things, but as far as my life goes, I don't get bored. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's kind of why I do pivot, because I do get bored with what I'm doing. And, like, for instance, we was selling, 80, to 100 houses a year. And I kind of got bored with that. And that's why I kind of got, other than needing something for retirement, but, that's why I pivoted into the rental management and the investing. And because I just got bored going out and showing houses day after day and everything. And I still I've slowed down enough now that I enjoy when I go do it. I enjoy it, but I don't have to go do it every day. I've got the other stuff that's taking care of us, and selling and showing houses is kind of extra at this point.
Right.
But.
Yeah, and I think that is, something that I don't know if you have consciously thought about, that you do get bored. And that, I think that is what has led to your pivoting, because you're chasing that excitement of something new. And I think that something that maybe it's in our genes or something, because I think you passed it down to me. We got just the right amount of excitement, commitment, and boredom or whatever, because it, instead of getting bored with something after a year, it's like getting bored with something after 10 years.
Right. Like that's a good chunk of time.
Which, allowed you to go, buy the water park, run that, to the best that you could think of to run it for 10 years until you were like, I'm kind of getting bored of doing this. And, you kept doing it to build the real estate business, and you did that for 10 years. And then you're like, well, I'm kind of bored of selling all these houses. And then you moved into rental management. And now because of the amount of commitment involved in there, you were able to build on top of each other to the point now where you're looking to retire, before 55.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the plan. We'll see. But we're getting close, so I think I can make it happen.
And even if you don't make it happen at 55, it's still before 60.
Yes.
And more people, and most, the vast majority
my
of people.
goal was for 60, 61, but I got bored with that idea, so I moved it up to 55.
Right.
Challenge yourself.
And so now you're going to move into, a life of being able to travel and, follow excitement around the world or wherever you want to go.
Exactly.
And, I think that one, is inspiring, and two, makes me think, is there any possibility that I'm going to be able to retire at 55?
Yeah.
Luckily though, you did not actually purchase the water park until you were 32. So I got
got a couple years.
I got a few more years before I have to catch up to my dad.
Couple years to make your
I can still
millions.
deliver pizzas for 3 years.
Yeah, and truthfully, I didn't start my retirement until, well, depending on how you want to look at it, I didn't start really getting into and buying rentals and stuff until I was probably 42, 43. So,
oh wow, we got plenty of time.
Yeah, but that started years ago. When I bought my first house at 22. I think you bought your first one at 19.
18.
Like 18. And I always took care of my credit. No matter what, my credit was always good. I never did anything that was going to hurt my credit. And so when it got to a certain point where we was able to buy another house 6 years later, we bought it, rented out the first house, and then, 14 years later, I sold them both and made, pretty good chunk of money and was able to finance my next goal in life. Mm-hmm. I started working on this from the very beginning to get here, but at the same time, it feels like I really didn't start till I was 42. Yeah. I mean, if you get to 42 and your credit's at 500, you got a lot of work to hit up.
Yeah. One other quick thing out of the 4-hour work week. I'm only like 7 chapters in, and also we're probably going to be talking about the 4-hour work week.
It's good, right?
Yeah, for just bits and pieces. You'll probably be seeing some tweets, and we'll also probably be bringing it up in the podcast because the last podcast we had about work-life balance, we had that whole conversation, and then I started the 4-hour work week, and I was reading, even just like in the first 3 chapters, like, this is exactly what I was saying. Timothy Ferriss and myself have like the exact same philosophies. He's just actually figured out exactly how to do it and put it into a book, and now I just need to
made
read
a lot
this
of
thing.
money out of it.
Yeah, if this is a unsolicited plug, if you enjoyed last week's podcast about work-life balance and you had any sort of agreement with what we had to say, then you will definitely love the 4-hour work week and you should read it. But
totally,
one of the things that he said within the first 7 chapters that I've read is talking about retirement and how retirement is this kind of outdated, outmoded thing that has been around, basically the industrial era, and all that, so kind of the baby boomer, the your generation, that type of stuff. It's all been about working 9 to 5, 40 hours a week for 60 years or whatever it is until you can retire. But I feel like most people have heard the arguments of like, well, then you retire whenever you're no longer in your prime. You're retiring essentially because you physically can't work anymore, depending on what you're doing. And, just basically paying, being able to survive without working because you can't. But his philosophy and the thing that he has said in challenging the new rich is what he calls it. I can't remember the exact terminology, but I think he calls it micro retirements, to take hundreds of micro retirements throughout your entire life. And so like his specific thing is that he quote unquote retires every 3 months or every 2 months.
He works 2 months and then takes a full month off to like learn a new skill or travel to a new place or whatever it is.
And so he takes an entire month off every quarter. So working 2 months an entire month off, working 2 months, an entire month off. And so not only does he get to, travel the world and learn new things and, do all of the things and the dreams and everything that you would possibly want to do. And, one of the things he talks about is, if you are a high achiever and you get to the age of retirement, 65, 70 or whatever it is, you're going to basically be bored out of your mind, after, a few weeks because you need something to do. And so it's, and then also just the fact that most people, whenever you get to retirement age, the amount of retirement that you have is essentially the amount of the least amount of income.
Right. Like including like with inflation and all that. It's usually not great.
Like you're probably going to go from living if you are living a great lifestyle, where you have,
whatever
excess, moving into retirement, most likely you're going to move back down into a lower middle class income. And anyways, getting into minutia of the book, but I just thought that was really interesting. And we're talking about retirement and just the fact of, taking, instead of working your whole life and then retiring all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to being excited, I think, is the whole point. Like, can most of us work 2 months and then take a full month off? No. But
Timothy would
disagree. He would disagree, yes. And I agree with him. I'm just saying, like,
we can easily make excuses for ourselves.
You got to start small though, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's not about taking an entire month off, but like take a long weekend and do something. Don't just like sit around, be creative, be curious, be excited.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, we have come to the end of this episode. Father of mine, is there anything that you would like to add? Anything you want to give to the people?
The main thing is, don't just sit around waiting for the right job. There's a lot of people that are ashamed to get a certain job, but if you don't have a job, take whatever you can get and then work your way up, until you can get a new job or work your way up that job. But don't be scared to change, if you got a better opportunity and it's not always that opportunity may not just show itself. You may have to make that opportunity, but if you're getting to a point where you're not happy or you're not making enough money, there's nobody can fix it but you. I mean, you just got to figure out what your next step is and figure out how you're going to get there and make it happen.
And you can also design your lifestyle away from having to kill yourself for income.
Right.
We obviously have to create income, but there is also, the fact that many people do not need the brand new car, do not need the excessively big house, do not need all of the things. And if you actually design your lifestyle around what you want instead of what the Joneses have, you could actually get a job that you enjoy and make way less money than what you think you need to make because you are creating the income needed to live the lifestyle that actually brings you excitement, not what creates this image of I made it.
Right. Yeah, it's not about making millions, but about like what Timothy Ferriss says in I think the first chapter of the 4-Hour Work Week. It's not about making millions and becoming a millionaire per se. It's about living like a millionaire,
right?
Or what we imagine a millionaire's lifestyle is.
Yeah,
and you can live that without being a millionaire.
Right. Which if you think about a millionaire's lifestyle, what you were thinking about is a lifestyle of freedom.
Yeah.
And you can live a lifestyle of freedom without $1 million.
Exactly.
You just have to design your lifestyle around it.
Yep. And be curious.
Yep.
So the three of us, because I got the 4-Hour Work Week for my dad for Christmas. And so the three of us are all reading this book right now. So we should do another podcast in a year and a half whenever you finish the book.
Yeah, it's going to be. I'm on chapter 2 at the moment. So
Hey, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So when you finish the book, maybe we could do another powwow book club podcast of lifestyle changes that we're gonna make after reading the 4-Hour Work Week.
Let's do it.
So that is the end of this episode of Deeply Curious. Thank you guys so much for joining us. As a reminder, this podcast is brought to you by our friends over at B&H Photo Video, and also by shop.deeplycurious.fm, where you can get yourself some Deeply Curious swag, which my dad reps all the time.
yes, I do.
I think my parents have purchased are our number one purchaser of shop.deeplycurious.fm. But yeah, thank you guys for listening,
Yeah.
and we will see you next week.
Bye.
See ya.